Welcome back to another episode of Grizzly True Crime. My name is Gisela K, and this is part 2 of the ABC killer that we're looking at from South Africa, Moses Sithole. If you missed part 1, I will link it in the description box for you, as well as in the comments. I hope that you will watch that. Thank you to everyone who's already watched that, given it a thumbs up, and left your comments. Your comments were very interesting, and I always appreciate it. I'm looking forward to your comments on this one as well, because part 3 will be me answering your most pertinent questions. I don't think I can get to all of them, but feel free to ask your questions about this case below, and I will get to them in part 3, and then we'll also look at some speculations relating to this case, which, yeah, I've said enough. That's what we're going to do for part 3. So now for part 2, what we're going to do is look at Moses Sithole's MO, his victims, and of course, please know that this is adult content. Okay, it's a true crime channel. We're looking at a serial killer case. Disclaimer, trigger warning, and all that. Are we ready? Let's get started. I can see I was lacking some snark in my first episode, huh? And what I was going to say is, doesn't he just look like Booger Man? Booger Man, Moses Sithole, he's got them right there. I'm like, ooh, here's a tissue. So there, you got the snark, okay? Also, if you would leave your comments below of what country and what killer you would recommend I cover next, I would love to read some of your suggestions, because as you know, I like to travel, huh? You know, I was a pilot before. I love to freaking travel. And so I'm thinking, let's cover some cases from all over the world, but don't worry. I know most of you are American or Canadian. The numbers don't lie. And don't worry, I will cover American cases too. Drop those below too. What do you want me to cover next? Of course, over here, this is a true crime channel, so we cover true crime cases, usually murder cases or serial killer cases. Okay, so I'm looking forward to your suggestions and all your comments based on today's episode. In part 1, what we did was look at a bit of Moses Sithole's background, when he was born, where he grew up, when he went to prison the first time, and then we looked at his first murder. So what we're going to do today is follow on from there and look at his MO, his victims, and how he was caught. And then, as I say, in part 3, I'm just going to be answering your questions and telling you about some of the speculations surrounding this case, which are actually very interesting. So I hope you will stick around for that as well. I'll make a playlist as well. It's on true crime South African cases. Hopefully at some point, huh? Imagine looking 5 years from now, we have one of each country. That would be so awesome, right? Also, speaking of country, just remember, Africa is not a country. It's a continent filled with countries. South Africa is a country. I know it confuses people because you're like, oh, South of Africa, so therefore Africa is a country. No, South Africa is a country in its own right, with its own history. It's where I'm from. And then there's a whole bunch of other countries in Africa. Okay, that was just my little note, because I see there are some people that are quite confused. Okay, so let's look at what I prepared for you today. The only screaming was, please don't kill me. And some of them would pray to me like a god. You see why I say he was South Africa's Ted Bundy? He literally speaks exactly like Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy said that, like in that moment, the thrill, when you're taking someone's life, you literally are a god. No, you're not. You're an absolute coward. I don't know where these people get off, where they're like, oh my word, I'm such a god. It's not that hard to choose that. As someone said in my previous episode, I'm so sorry that I don't remember your name, but you were like, actually, it's a lot easier to kill than not to, especially if you are filled with rage and pain and trauma and all that. Yes, I agree with you. They're cowards. They are not powerful, masculine, I don't know what. They're definitely not cool either. This is why we snark it there. You know what I mean? No, they would pray to me like a god. No, they're pleading for their life. Because you're being completely unreasonable, unfair, inhumane, cruel, and murdering unsuspecting victims. And isn't it so sickening how they always target vulnerable people, right? They're always like, ooh, like unsuspecting. I mean, okay, like it's like, why are you doing this to these people? It is ridiculous, and there are other alternates. If you are filled with rage, with pain, with trauma, you have a grit, a chip on both shoulders. Not just on one. You got a chip on both shoulders. Don't take it out on other people. Look in the mirror, sort that out, go to therapy, do some sport, succeed, channel that rage to become a success. You know what I mean? Make something beautiful out of it. I don't know. That's just my thoughts. Okay, moving right along. I'm going off on a tangent. But by July of 1994, Moses Sithole had progressed from SA, which we all know what that is, to murder within 4 months following his first murder. So, yeah, once he did it once, he was hooked. This is often what we see in these cases. A lot of you are surprised that he was only active as a serial killer for a year. But if you look at other serial killer cases, which we're going to continue to do on this channel, you'll see it's often like they go wild for a year or two and then they're caught, because it's ridiculous, especially when they do it this much, when they just cannot stop. It's like a complete addict. I also like your thoughts on my previous episode. A lot of you agree with me that they don't kill to make the crime perfect. They don't kill again and again and again to make it the perfect murder. They literally do it because they're hooked on it. They like the adrenaline of it. They like the control, the power, the feeling of it. And yeah, I guess it becomes like an addiction. So yeah, thank you for all your comments there as well. It was very interesting to read all the different perspectives as well. So when multiple bodies started piling up in fields, they were then taken to a mortuary to be examined. And this arrogant mofo would go and kill again in the exact same spot as where those bodies were found. So the police, of course, were like, oh my word, this guy is so arrogant. Like when they go back to the crime scene and they're like, right, let's just have a look at this, see if we can find any other evidence. Oh, there's more bodies. Yep, he was cocky as hell. The media then began to cover the stories of women being lured into fields and then ending up being murdered. Their faces were on the front pages. It became a big thing. And of course, not only did the community start fearing, all the women in communities across Gauteng started fearing for their lives. No, Moses also reveled in that spotlight, of course. He's like, oh my word, they're starting to cover my cases in the media. He liked it. So his MO became seeking out women who were looking for jobs, making sure that he gained their trust by setting up a second appointment. So he would meet them. He would actually stalk them just about. He'd like go into town, dressed like a businessman, fold a newspaper, knife in the newspaper, walk around pretending to be looking for jobs, but also pretending to be a businessman, which with the change in South Africa that happened in 1994, he could have been a businessman. All the opportunities were there in front of him, but instead he decided, I'm going to pretend to be one, and then I'm going to lure women into fields and feel all powerful. Okay, dude. If that's what you want to do with your life. What the heck, man? Okay. So what he would do is meet these women who he could see. He was actually pretty good, obviously, at reading body language. He was very intuitive, which we saw in part 1. But what he would do was set up this first meeting with someone like, hey, I see you're looking for a job. Come with me. I have a very, very nice job for you. And they're like, oh my word, really? So then he would set up a second appointment where he would literally sip cold drinks with them, take them to like a cafe or a coffee shop and talk to them, get to know them. And why? We'll see in a moment. Then he would set up the third appointment and say, I will personally escort you to your new job. Okay, so we're going to meet at the train station, or we're going to meet here in this crowded area so that they build even more trust. Then he would flag down a taxi, which is like a minibus in South Africa, public transport. He would flag down a taxi, hop in with his victim, take a drive, and then ask the taxi, okay, cool, you could stop here, hop out, and then walk them through the fields in broad daylight. And as soon as he felt like, yeah, we're isolated enough now, he would murder them. Now, why did he do this? Because he got off on betrayal, because he felt so betrayed in life. So he took that feeling of betrayal, avoided it, and inflicted it on others. That is what not to do. Actually just sit in your own feelings of betrayal, work through it, feel the pain, cry, deal with it, go to therapy, do something like that. But no, he took that feeling of betrayal and made sure to build trust with his victims, to almost spoil them, and then to, in that moment, be like, guess what? And make them feel absolutely betrayed, maximum fear, and then he would get, of course, maximum control. What he would also do, his MO involved making them, he'd whip out his knife and then instruct them to undress in front of him because he liked the humiliation thing, of course. And they were absolutely fearful, of course, in that moment. So he would show them this knife, which in the documentaries I've seen, it looked to be some sort of a machete type thing. I don't think it was like it's not a butter knife, you know what I mean? It's like, I think he whipped out his machete. They were terrified. He would tell them to undress. Then he would assault them. And then he would proceed to strangle them. Now, what he did often was, because he also bragged about it, remember, how do we know? Because autopsies, but also because he bragged about it. He would strangle his victim just enough so they would pass out. And then when they revived, he would do it again. This is something that John Wayne Gacy used to really enjoy doing, was the whole reviving, choking. But John Wayne Gacy would then read Bible verses. Oh, my word, that is so freaky. If you haven't read my John Wayne Gacy book, it is on Amazon. If you search Gisela K, you'll find my books there. There's also plenty of notebooks now for you to choose from, which are like journals, notebooks or journals, blank page, so you can scribble your own thoughts, take some notes as you watch these true crime episodes, those type of things. So it's all on Amazon. The link is also below. The point is that Moses Sithole was kind of like Bundy and Gacy combined. The MO was very, very similar. And man, he wanted that maximum feeling of, having power over someone's life and death. He wanted to prolong their death as well, which is disgusting. In some cases, he would make a noose out of his victims' purse straps and things, and tie them to a tree where they would just be able to just stand. And then he would watch. And when they couldn't stand any longer, he would laugh because they would slip and fall or couldn't hold themselves and just lowered themselves, which would result in them strangling themselves. See, Gacy also did that. I'm like, haha, you did it to yourself. But like, no, they didn't. And to think of how sadistic Moses was to do that, to sit there in the field, tie them to a tree and watch until they strangle themselves. And then he didn't just leave it at that. Of course, this was to taunt them. Yes. Okay, I won't get too graphic with it. We'll leave it at that. But that's what he did. Once he had become comfortable as a serial killer, he of course needed to up his game to sustain the feeling of control and power. So you know what he did then? He started taunting the families of his victims. He even called one of the grandmothers of his victims and said, "It serves you well. You are now walking over the grave of Monica." That must have been freaky. And at that point, this person would have been missing for whether it was days or weeks or months. So to call them and say, "It serves you well. You are now walking over the grave of Monica." What? Oh, okay. Disturbing. Moses then anonymously called the police to tip them off about his brother-in-law, which was actually kind of smart if you think about it. Now let me explain what he did. So he called the police and said, "I know who that killer is. It's this guy," which happened to be his brother-in-law. So the police then obviously followed up, interrogated the brother-in-law, and then they realized, oh, it's not him, so they released him. But what did Moses do? He met up with his brother-in-law like, so what did they ask? So he found out what the police know and what they don't know, what type of questions they were asking, and where they really were in the investigation. That's how he stayed one step ahead of them. He would do all these things to make sure that he was always one step ahead of them, of course, until he was caught. Sithole was at the same time living his cover life, convincing his family and friends that he was out in the city every day searching for a job. That was also normal during that time because there were so many more opportunities for African people in that time, given the political climate that had changed. On December the 5th, 1994, Martha, who was considered his wife, even though they weren't legally married, gave birth to their daughter. By July of 1995, Moses Sithole had murdered 18 young black women and left their bodies scattered in the fields outside of Pretoria and Johannesburg. Police were following every lead they had, and women were becoming more and more fearful, which made them more cautious. So you know what Moses decided to do? To lure his victims to continue what he was doing? He read the newspaper every day, studied the changing political climate, found a loophole, so to speak, of like, this is how I can take advantage of people. And then he launched a fictitious social service agency called Youth Against Human Abuse. Like, how freaking ironic is that? He made an agency and called it Youth Against Human Abuse. Like, wow, the nerve of this guy. With the supposed mission of reuniting orphans with their families. Again, we can see his trauma in plain sight. It's like, oh, you wanted to be reunited as an orphan with your family. Didn't get to do that. Your mother sent you back to the orphanage. So now you make this fictitious, sinister, fake agency called Youth Against Human Abuse. We reunite orphans with their families. Except you don't. All he was looking for is to be in contact with more females that he would then target to be his victims. Because he was a little bit selective. It wasn't just anyone. Of course, as we see in all serial killer cases. Well, most, right? So he used this fake agency to create false job opportunities, inviting, of course, women to apply. So he made flyers. I wonder who paid for that. That's my question. Who paid for him to print all those flyers? Where did he get the money? But he printed out a whole bunch of flyers, walked around town, dished out the flyers to potential victims. In August of 1995, Sithole contacted a prominent photographer. I'm not too sure who this photographer was. I was very curious, but I can't find the name. Contacted a prominent photographer, introducing him to his agency and told him that he needed to find a group home for 2 homeless children. So I don't know why this photographer would be... It sounds to me like a journalist type of photographer. You know what I mean? Someone working for a newspaper, or there must be a connection there somewhere. But he asked him, can you help me find an orphanage that could, assist in finding a group home for these 2 homeless children? The photographer, of course, put him in touch with Kids Haven, gave him access to an orphanage called Kids Haven. And that is where Moses Sithole met Trifina Machotsi, who was a single mom who supported her entire family, her mom, her sister, her 2 brothers, and her children. That is unfortunately still common in South Africa today, where one person is the sole provider, the breadwinner of an entire family living in a very small kind of like tin house, which we call them shacks in these informal settlements. So Trifina absolutely wanted to make more money. She wanted to support her family even better. And Moses knew this was the perfect target. Now, Trifina had a friend who was very situationally aware that worked at Kids Haven. And her name was Esther Malangu. I think in South Africa we would say Matlangu. I don't see the H in the spelling of her surname, but Esther Malangu was there and remembers the day that Moses Sithole arrived at Kids Haven, offering Trifina a job, which Esther actually said she was initially quite envious of. Like, oh my word, she's going to get this amazing new job opportunity, paying so much. I mean, she was like, I want that. But then she never saw her friend again.
I was very much jealous about Trifina. She's going to get a new job and they huge money like that.
And later her body was found, which we'll get into now. Trifina was over the moon because she would finally be able to support her family in a way that she had always wanted to. Now in his typical MO, Moses made a second appointment with Trifina on August 15, 1995, and told her to meet him at a train station where he would personally be escorting her to her new job. Esther wished her friend well, and following her meeting with Moses, Esther never heard from her friend again. Her disappearance and Esther's excellent memory would eventually lead the police to Moses Sithole. So props to Esther, because she remembered not only what he looked like, his name, his surname, everything. She's like, Moses Sithole, he looked like this. She was very, very aware. I like it. She sounds like a true crimer, you know what I mean? Trifina was led into a field and strangled. Her body was discovered on September 17th, and leading up to this, her photo had been published in the newspaper after her family had reported her missing. Because, of course, 1, they missed her, but 2, there was also now no income. Their sole provider was missing, and they had no answers, like literally what happened. So they reported her missing to the police, and then her picture was printed in the newspaper, which, of course, Moses would have also liked. But then the police obviously did a follow-up because this was now big news, another body showing up in a field, and so they visited Tryphina's place of work, Kids Haven. And there they learned of a Mr. Sithole, who was the last person to see her alive. Now, Sithole is actually quite a common surname in South Africa, so the police went one more time to Kids Haven, and then with a picture this time, showing them a Moses Sithole, who they'd found on the system, having a former sentence. He was formerly incarcerated for SA, and they're like, is this the man you're talking about? And Esther's like, that's the guy. That is the man who was here. And then they knew. Finally, the police were like, oh my word, this is the identity of the serial killer we're looking for. On October 2nd, 1995, at 6 p.m., Moses called the newsroom of the Johannesburg Star, very popular newspaper then. 26-year-old Tasman de Beer answered, and Moses immediately said, I am the man that everyone is looking for, except he introduced himself as Joseph. He had lots of different names. I told you, he came up with all kinds of names for himself. So, Joseph. Following this initial call, Moses would then have 3 more lengthy conversations with Tamsin from a payphone. She described him as a very charming and well-spoken man and said that they were developing trust as their conversations unfolded. Now remember that English was not his first language. South Africa has 11 official languages. So for Moses to be this charming, to come across as this well-spoken, it just demonstrates his intelligence. Imagine if you speak a second language, do you? Imagine in your second language being so professional and so well-spoken that you charm anyone and a journalist, and that you're able to be like, I'm the man that everyone is looking for. Like, whoa. He told Tamsin that the murders were his way of highlighting the injustice that he had suffered after being falsely accused and incarcerated for SA in 1988. Hold a grudge much, bro? And also, it wasn't an injustice. He literally assaulted multiple women, and one managed to report him. He got sentenced, and yes, he was in prison for a number of years. But he felt so betrayed by that he's like, yeah, these murders are my way of highlighting that injustice. Okay. His motive for calling was to outsmart the police and continue to stay one step ahead of them. That's what he told Tamsin. And he told her details of the crimes that he had committed, taunting the media with where he had placed the bodies that the police had not yet found. So when Tamsin told the police about these conversations, initially they're like, surely you're not actually speaking to the killer though. But then Moses started saying, there's a body they haven't found yet. Tell them to go there and there. And when they'd go to these places, there was the body, exactly how he described them. And that is how they realized, oh my word, she's like actually talking to the killer. He is literally calling journalists at this point. He's that arrogant. He described to her the intrigue that he experienced in the various responses of his victims, saying that some women would fight while others would simply give up, and that he was often surprised by some women's physical strength, thrilled by how much he had to fight them to win. He literally said, to win. One lady knew karate, and I think you guys say karate. We say karate. Do not accent police me. Oh, thank you. And he said to this victim, if you lose, you die. Like, he literally enjoyed the fight. He wasn't like, oh, crap, this lady's going to kick my butt. No, he was like, oh, yeah, it's on. Like, he really enjoyed the fight as well. And remember, he was also training to be a boxer, so he was pretty strong. When police found the bodies described by Moses to Tamsin, as I say, they knew then, oh my word, they're dealing with this exact serial killer. On his third call to her, he ran out of money on the payphone that he was using, so Tamsin offered to call him back. And because they developed the trust, he's like, okay, here's the number. Okay, so then she passed that number on to police and then called him back. So that was very, very smart of her as well, to not just get all lost in the abyss of this man on the phone, but to first call the police and be like, okay, he's given me this number, this is where it is. And so they traced the number of that payphone. And while he was on the phone to Tamsin, when she had called him back, she heard the phone just suddenly just go silent, and he ran. Because, of course, there must have been sirens, the police pulled up, And you know what he did then? Oh, by the way, I wanted to say that she said that she felt tremendous empathy for him. Like, shame, I hope they didn't shoot him. Like, I hope he's okay. Like, where is he? This poor, lost, broken man. And see, that's the thing that these types do. They leave you sometimes feeling with this overwhelming sense of empathy, but it's, no, she said she also realized then, wait a minute, but he's a monster. So the initial thought was, shame, I hope he's okay. I hope they don't hurt him. And then she's like, oh, but he's a monster. Okay. Moses, you know what he did? He called Tamsin later and berated her for breaking the trust. So he felt betrayed, of course. So, whoa, that must have been a scary time for her because he was very dangerous and felt betrayed by her. That's like one of his trigger points, right? He made sure to express his feelings. And this in some way reveals the vulnerability that he carried inside. The rejection and betrayal, of course, were his triggers, and this is something that he inflicted on his victims to try to soothe those feelings. That's also what I mean. Sometimes there are very, very difficult feelings that you might feel like, I can't survive these. This is too hard. And you need to soothe those somehow. And sometimes it feels like there is no way to soothe that, which is why we end up with people unaliving themselves or harming others, right? However, there must be a way to find something to soothe those feelings. And I think the first way is self-acceptance, knowing this is what happened to me, this is how I feel right now, and just acknowledging your own feelings. Okay, I'm not trying to make like a pep talk in the middle here. I'm just saying I feel like running from those feelings really doesn't soothe it. Inflicting harm on others really doesn't soothe it, especially not long-term, of course. I mean, can you imagine how he's feeling sitting in prison now? You know what I mean? Moses then called his brother-in-law and asked him to hook him up with a gun. His name was Maxwell Makabeni, and he arranged to meet Sithole at a factory where he worked. And he actually set him up because he called the police and told him that this meetup was happening. So I think he was probably tipped off from that very strange conversation of like, oh, so what did the police say to you? Because he must have put two and two together and realized, whoa, this guy actually set me up. He tipped the police off that I was the killer and then asked me all these questions about what they asked. He was smart. So this time he's like, oh, I'll hook you up with a gun. Meet me at this factory. And as soon as Moses got there, all excited to pick up this gun, there was an undercover policeman lying in wait at the gate, ready to arrest him. When Sithole arrived, he quickly sensed the trap and fled, which, of course, as I said before, demonstrates his ability to read the room, with his remarkable intuition that he unfortunately used only for evil. Can you imagine if he used all this body language, expertise, intuition, intelligence, creativity, communication skills for something that would better serve his life and not harm others? Imagine. Sometimes I dream about the parallel life that these people could have lived, which I touched on in my first episode, but just imagine it. If they just chose something else and made a huge success of themselves, wouldn't that just be so nice to see the alternate? To even be able to show them the alternate. Look, this is what, if you had just chosen differently here, look what you turned out to be. Oh my word. That would be amazing. Okay. So yes, the police chased him down an alleyway and Sithole turned around and took a swipe at one of the officers with an axe, who then shot at him several times, hitting him in the stomach and leg. He was rushed to the hospital where he was questioned by an investigator, but guess what? Moses was uncooperative. Like literally this investigator could get nowhere with him. He asked him, Moses, did we find all the victims? And he said, I don't know. And then he's like, let me ask again, Moses, did we find all the victims? And he said, I don't know, because I wasn't with you. So then this investigator realized, you know what, he's probably going to respond better to women. So they sent in a female investigator, and guess what? He opened right up. Like, he really opened right up. Like, he even opened his pants. He was so excited to tell her all about his crimes, everything he'd done, that of course he got aroused by it and then, soothed himself while telling the stories, which must have been so freaking awkward for that detective. Like, oh my word. Oh, I would hate to be in that situation. So my little dream of saying like, oh, I want to talk with potential serial killers and be like, there is another way. Okay, but just keep your pants on. Okay, keep your pants on. Because a lot of these serial killers, oh my word. Like, obviously, once they're serial killers, they get so excited by the things that they've done that they literally can't stop themselves from you know what I'm talking about. From that, ew, I just honestly, I have like secondhand PTSD for that detective, just sitting there being like, oh my word, okay, wow, he's very excited to tell me this story now. When asked why he assaulted and murdered 37 young women, because remember the number's 38, but one was a 2-year-old child that he had murdered, which I'll tell you about in a moment, Moses said it was to teach them a lesson. Okay, there are other ways to teach lessons, okay? I don't think they learnt it because they're dead. Do you know what I mean? No, lessons mean the person gets to learn. Okay, that's my snark for now. When Sithole was in jail awaiting trial, Derek Skuman, a fellow inmate, managed to smuggle in recording equipment and videotape an interview with him. He said, I fully hate black women. A woman can hurt you more than a man, more than anybody in this world.
He's writing on the spot, and then the decision, the final decision, that here she must die. She can see it. I should die, then she can see it. But she can no chance. Nothing will help her.
On October 21st, 1996, Moses was charged with 38 murders and 40 SAs in the Pretoria High Court. More than 140 witnesses testified against him for the state, including Esther Malangu, Trifina's friend. Esther describes how Moses would try his level best to intimidate the witnesses, which included staring them down, laughing at them, and shaking his head. She was terrified, but knew that she needed to help get justice for her friend and co-worker who was murdered by this monster. When the crowds, this is badass, when the crowds that had gathered outside heard about Sithole's arrogance, they demanded that the judge release him to them so that they could punish him themselves. I like that. Of course, that never happened, but they're like, that's it, release him to us, we'll sort him out. I don't know. That also seems like it would be so cool if that could be done in life. 2 wrongs do not make a right. I know that, but it's like, remember when Richard Ramirez was tackled by an entire community when they realized, oh my word, that's him. Like, he was beaten. He was. The police actually intervened in the Richard Ramirez case, the Night Stalker. If you don't know about that, interesting. Hi, True Crime Channel. Want me to cover that? Let me know. Yes, when the police found Richard Ramirez being attacked by all these people, they actually had to isolate him to protect him because they were going to kill him. So I feel like it's like this as well. They're like, release him to us. We'll sort him out. Now, the death penalty was abolished in South Africa on June the 6th, 1995. So Sithole would not be facing capital punishment, but to ensure that he would never get out and kill again, because he of course would, right? He was sentenced to 2,410 years in prison. His defense attorney said that Moses was literally shocked because throughout that trial, he thought, I'm going to be acquitted, much like we see in a lot of these cases. I mean, Ted Bundy represented himself because remember, he was studying law. He wasn't a lawyer yet, but he studied law and he's like, I will defend myself. Thank you very much. He really believed he would get away with it. So did Moses Sithole. Moses was immediately taken to C-Max in Pretoria, a maximum security prison, where Nelson Mandela, Oscar Pistorius, Eugene de Kock, Ananias Mate, Sipho Twala, and other notable inmates were or had been, and there he was held without the possibility for parole. Moses was diagnosed with HIV/AIDS after his arrest, where he benefited. This is the worst part of the story. Like, I don't mean with the murders. I just mean him going to prison. You're like, yeah, C-Max and like moving around prisons, which we'll look at now. But he benefited from in-prison medical care, while his wife and daughter, who he had infected, had no money to get that same medical care outside in the free world. Like, that I find such an injustice. That is so unfair. They shouldn't have given him that treatment in prison. You know what I mean? His wife died of the disease because she had no one to care for her. She had no funding to help her get the treatment that he was getting in prison. My word. Actually, a huge percentage of the population still cannot and could not afford that medical treatment. So being in prison gave him some benefits. He could not afford, but he got top medical treatment. That is unfortunate. Moses Sithole committed his heinous crimes in a time that represented a lot of hope and change for black people in South Africa. He could have become the businessman that he saw himself to be, and if he had used his charm, intelligence, and creativity to become a success, he surely would have been. Instead, he took the lives of 37 innocent women and one child, the 2-year-old son of one of his victims. And possibly 42 more women based on his own confessions. It's again like Bundy, where he's like, oh, actually, it's like, add another digit to those, then you'll get there. Like, no one knows how many people Ted Bundy killed, and no one knows how many people Moses Sithole actually killed. And he also assaulted 40 more women. Thankfully, he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. He was transferred to the Zonderwater Maximum Medium A Correctional Center in Cullinan in March of 2011, and then a month later to the Johannesburg Maximum Medium C Correctional Center at his request. Why they allow him to request things, or any inmate, I'm like, worldwide, right? Where it's like, no, at my request, I want to this and this. Remember when they moved Chris Watts as well? Because like, I just can't handle it here. Can you move me? Oh, my word. On August 17th, 2011, he was forcefully, according to him, he says the word forcefully, transferred to the Mangwan prison in Bloemfontein, where he currently is. While no reasons were given for the move, I can only imagine that it was to make his quality of life even worse. Because now, people that were visiting him, I don't know who those people were. He actually said his daughter, so maybe his daughter was visiting him. They can't afford to get to him in Bloemfontein because it's more than 500 kilometers away. So the cost of travel to visit him would be too much for them. 500 kilometers is around 310 miles. And taxis, which are minibuses, which is public transport, is way too expensive to go cross country all the way to Bloemfontein. So he's alone there. No one's visiting him in Bloemfontein. These are the known names of his victims. Some names were sadly unknown and they were listed as unidentified women. I always find that so sad. There is like no justice whatsoever. And I've already told you that one of my pet peeves is when they list victims as belonging to a killer. Like, these are Jeffrey Dahmer's victims, and then they just list the names. So if you do buy any of my books, especially the paperbacks, you will see that every single victim, I've filled in as much information about them as I possibly could find, like what they liked, what they did, what they were aspiring to be when they were born, when they were unfortunately murdered, who their family members were, things like that, because I cannot stand it in serial killer cases where it's almost as if the victims belong to the killer. They're like Jeffrey Dahmer's victims. Ted Bundy's victims are. So they are their victims, but they are whole people that had whole lives that deserve all the justice possible. So these are the names that are known, and man, it's so sad that there were so many names not known. So we've got Maria Monene Monama. She was 18 years old. Amanda Kebofile, 26. Joyce Takani Mashabela, 32 years old. Refilwe Amanda Mokale, 24. Rose Rebotile Mokhotse, 22. Beauty Nuko Soko, 27. We've got Sarah Mokono, 25. Nikiwe Diko. When I don't list the age, it's because they didn't know the age of the person. Leta Nomtandazo Ndlagamandla. We've got Sibosiso Ndlangamadla, the son of Leta, died of an injury to the head and exposure. So remember when I said I'll tell you? That is interesting if we look at this case, because he didn't murder the little boy. The little boy had an injury to his head and was just left out in the field. That is terrible. So his mother had been murdered in proximity. 2 years old, died of exposure. But it's interesting that Moses was not able to murder the little boy. It's actually more cruel, don't you think? Then there's Esther Moshibudi Maneja, 29. Granny Dimakatso Ramela, 21. Francina Nomsa Sitebe, 25. Elizabeth Granny Matetsa, 19. Mildred Ntia Lepule, 28. Elsie Koti Masango, 25. Ernestina Mohari Mosebo, 30. Josephine Mansali Langeni, 25. Oscarina Vuyokazi Jakalasi, 30. Makoba Trifina Mokhotsi, Trifina, right? 26. Nelisiwe Nontobeko Zulu, 26. Amelia Dikamakhatso Rapodile, 43. Monica Gabisile Vilazaki, 31. Hazel Nozipo Mandikizela, 21. Tsidi Malekua Matela, 45. Agnes Sibongile Mbuli, 20. And Beauty Ntombi Ndabeni. Those are the names that we know. And that's 27 names. So there's 10 names that we don't know. And of course, actually, there's 11 names we don't know because the little boy's name is included in this list. So that is really, really sad. So as I say in part 3, I will answer some of your top questions. So please leave that below. Relating to this case, of course, please don't ask me questions about other cases because it makes no sense. We're talking about this case right now. So please leave me questions about this case on this video. And next, I will just answer those questions and touch on the speculation of David Selepe. Okay, I don't want to say too much now. So I'm going to touch on why they believed he was an accomplice of Moses Sithole, why his murders were similar, and all of that kind of stuff, which I find very interesting. Same as the John Wayne Gacy case. I found that very interesting to think of his accomplices, speculations of possible more murders that he may have committed, where more bodies may be found, which they said might even be in the concrete, under the concrete at these ice cream parlors that John Wayne Gacy set up. If you want to know more about that, I would highly recommend buying one of my books because then you'll read all the details. Because if you don't already know that I deep dive, just look where I started in true crime. I've written lots of books, but in true crime, if you look at my books, they're almost like manual style because it's all the facts laid out in a way that's easy to find and access. Like I have all the facts on Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, and Eileen Wuornos. So if you want to check that out, it's on Amazon. Just search for Grizzly K. You'll find all my books and all my notebooks as well, and I'll link it below. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate that if you made it all the way to the end. If you like the way that I present true crime, it's not about, yeah, I like murder. It's about, yes, I like the way Grizzly covers true crime. Please give this video a thumbs up, and looking forward to your comments. If you haven't yet subscribed, this is your reminder to do that. Subscribe. Okay, thank you. Thank you also to all my patrons. I absolutely appreciate your support. Thank you to my YouTube members, to everyone who buys me a coffee, who donates through PayPal, who buys my merch, my books, and just supports the work that I do. I really, really appreciate it. It keeps me going. It keeps me motivated and deep diving all this to produce this content for you, which I work very, very hard to do. I will see you in the next one for part 3. Until then, stay safe, be mindful of those red flags, okay? And keep it snarky.